Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Valerie Jarrett, and I'm a senior advisor to President Barack Obama. And we are so delighted this afternoon to be here at Facebook. And we thank everyone at Facebook for hosting us. The President just concluded a town hall, and it was terrific. And now we're looking forward to having a panel discussion on women in technology. I want to specifically thank Cheryl for not only being here and hosting us today, but she actually flew out to Washington yesterday to be a part of a discussion that the President had about comprehensive immigration reform. And so on the flight back out here, we had a chance to spend some time, and I know what a dynamic leader she is. So thank you on behalf of everyone who's here today for hosting us and creating this wonderful opportunity.
Well, thank you for coming. We're very excited.
Well, good. Well, good. We're also joined by Jocelyn Goldfein from Facebook. And on the way out, Cheryl told me how unusual it is to have a director of engineering be a woman. And so congratulations to you. And we're all looking forward to insight from you. Thanks. We are also joined by Teresa Gao-Rosetta, who's an entrepreneur and venture capitalist at Excel Partners, where she focuses on internet and software investment. And since we know how important access to capital is, we're delighted to have you with us. So thank you, Teresa, for coming. She gets a little round of applause.
You're backing Facebook, if nothing else.
I know, exactly. Smart investment, I would say. Jessica Heron, who we are told is a serial entrepreneur and the CEO and founder of Stella and Dot, as well as WeddingChannel.com, which I understand you started in school. So congratulations, and we're delighted to have you with us. So welcome as well.
Thank you.
So we are looking forward to having an interesting conversation about how we can get more women into technology. And I'm just going to start out by saying this is a priority of President Obama. You heard, those of you who participated or attended the town hall, you heard him over and over again emphasize how important it is to get girls and women interested in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and math. That's the wave of the future. That's where the innovation is. That's where the terrific paying jobs are. And that's a big challenge for the administration. And as I was doing a little research for today, a couple of few facts I thought were pretty telling, shall we say. So first of all, our workforce is now comprised 50% of women. In technology, it's 25%. Now, if you think about it, also, the number of companies that are starting off and getting going that are owned by women in technology, it's 8%, and the amount of capital that's being invested, a percentage in women-owned businesses in technology is only 5%. So if you look at it from that perspective, you see we really, really have a long way to go. So we're doing a variety of things in the administration. What we're hoping to do in the course of this panel is to engage in a conversation. We're going to be I'm going to do some questions that have been posted on Facebook. We're going to have questions from those of you who are sitting here in the audience. And for those of you who are listening, we are so delighted to have people who are on Facebook and who are going to participate. We'll also have some live questions coming from you. So we're going to manage to do all of that in the course of our time together, and I'm going to keep things going pretty quickly. So let me focus for a second still on what the administration is doing. We have an initiative that is being led by Ursula Burns, who's the CEO of Xerox, who's a wonderful role model, I think, for women and girls. And she's focusing on a project called Change the Equation. And it's a not-for-profit entity that's raising money to focus on over 100 communities where they're going to go into our high schools and try to get girls interested in these fields, because what we're finding, and Cheryl and I also talked about this on the plane, research is showing that at a very early age, as early as 8th grade, girls go on a different path. And so what we want to be able to do is excite them and get them to think it's cool again, as the President said in the town hall. There's money in the President's budget to set up centers around the country, women business centers, to help women entrepreneurs get going, provide them access to capital. We have a wonderful small business administration that's working on staffing these centers and providing, again, much needed early capital to help women-owned businesses get going. And then we're just investing in STEM education. The President at the town hall mentioned how important it is at a time when we're trying to be fiscally responsible to still continue to invest in education and innovation, because that's the wave of the future. So I'm going to pause with what we're doing and get started a little bit on the questions for all of you that we have here. And I'm hoping that this is my first time, which shows you how technology has been known to escape me, but I've been told that if I just press these buttons, I'm going to be able to do this. And it worked. It worked. So I'm just so happy it worked. I cannot tell you how happy it worked. So my first question is from Amy in Knoxville. And it's a question for all of the panelists, and so I'm going to give you all a chance to jump in. And that is, do you think that making the workplace more flexible for women, like flex time opportunity, can help make it possible for more women to stay in their jobs? The reason why I started with this question, we had a forum in the White House about a year ago on workplace flexibility generally, and how really it actually leads to greater productivity. But I'm curious about what you guys think specifically within the technology arena. So let's start with you, Cheryl, since you're our host.
So I think the issue is flexibility for parents and both people, both men and women. The number one thing that will help more women stay in the workforce is actually a greater gender balance at home. So in a lot of ways, we've made more progress in our workplace than we have in our home. In the home, if a heterosexual couple both work full-time, the woman will do 2 times the amount of housework and 3 times the amount of childcare that the husband does. And so, basically, he has 1 job and she has 2 or 3. And so I think the answer for all of our companies is to make flex time available for people of both genders, so that people of both genders have the opportunity to contribute fully in the home and at work.
What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, it's critical. There's so many talented women that are sidelined because they actually choose to want to spend more time raising kids when they get into their 30s, and they look at rigid options of either stopping out and sitting on the sidelines, and then they find it challenging to get on the same track with momentum when they want to re-enter a few years later. But if you could keep them in by being more flexible, because until you get all the way there with gender equality in the home, which is going to be a long road, you still need to acknowledge that women right now today have amazing brains and have a lot to contribute, and if you can be more flexible, which technology is a huge enabler of, then you can keep them and you can bend, and it's worth it to do that as a company.
Thank you. Teresa?
So I agree with both of those points, and following up on the technology piece, I think one of the things that I've seen Silicon Valley do really well and my startups do really well is use things like technology to make flex time more possible both for men and women. So for example, one of my companies happens to be led by a female CEO. She has a workforce which is incredibly geographically dispersed, probably because 30% of them are PhDs in math, science, and computer science. So they use video conferencing through Skype all the time, and that saves a lot in terms of both travel, where that time can be used more productively. The other thing is, if people need to leave work early because they want to have the flexibility to be at home with their kids, I found that both male and female CEOs, if you're trying to keep a superstar, they will make that decision every time. And the other thing I found is, as you give more, you get more. So you say, great, you want to stay in the workforce, you've had your 3rd child, you can go home early twice a week. You know what, I guarantee you that person is the person who's going to be the first person on email and the last person on email that night.
Absolutely. Jocelyn, what do you say?
I really strongly agree with what Cheryl said about this being a parents' issue, and about having men step up at home being actually the big issue for women staying in the workforce. And I guess what I can add to it is a slight anecdote. At Facebook, we have a policy that's unique in my working experience, which is that both men and women get 4 months of paid parental leave when they have a child, when a child comes into their family. And at least in my part of the organization, in engineering, the men take it. They actually have better parental leaves a lot of the time than their wives do. And so we routinely work around the fact that a guy is going to be gone on paternity leave for a month or 2 months or more. And I can't imagine what a difference that's making for their wives at home. And I know that's helping at least their wives stay in the workforce.
Thank you. Now, if we can keep women in the workforce, and the next challenge is, of course, making sure that they reach leadership levels. And Cheryl, tell us a little bit about how women are doing in technology and leadership roles. Obviously, you're a role model. Jocelyn's a role model. Give us an assessment of the industry from your vantage point.
So there's a lot of good news and there's some challenges. The good news is that more women are entering the workforce in large numbers, The bad news is that both in the business world and actually every industry, women are not actually still making it to the top. So women became more than 50% of the college degrees in the United States in 1981, so it's been quite a long time. And we're basically stagnating at like about 15% of the top jobs in every industry. And those numbers have not moved up in the last 8 years. So for a while they were moving up. In technology, women have about 22% of the jobs, but of engineering managers, it's 6%. And so the really big issue is not just getting them into the workforce, but getting them to stay in and get all the way to the top. In technology, we have a funnel problem as well, which is that as a percentage of computer science students, women as a percentage are dropping. The high was hit in something like 1985 or 1987 of 37%. The percentage today of women in computer science is down to 18%. And so, we believe, obviously, in technology, that technology is really important for the future. And a lot of the great leaders, not just of technology companies, but of almost every company, will have to have technical backgrounds. And so doing what we can to get our young girls, because they fall behind really early, interested in math, science, and into technology, we think is not just vital for women, but is really important for economic growth in this country.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's actually a perfect segue to my question to Jocelyn. How'd you do it? When did your interest spark, and how did you manage to get where you are? What's your story?
I don't think I did anything terribly special, but that seems to be a common thread with a lot of the women engineers I work with. Some patterns I think I've observed. We always had computers in the house. My dad was a computer scientist and was technical, and so that was always around. And, frankly, I was pretty geeky from early on. So I read a lot of science fiction and, played video games. And I don't think that those things directly led to me being in computer science. But I do think they led me to kind of identify with technology and with these kinds of pursuits. And so those weren't things that turned me off. It wasn't a barrier. And I think very often the biggest barrier to women in computer science is they look in the classroom and it's all guys. Well, I had gone through junior high and high school being the only girl who was at the table for role playing or the only girl at the science fiction convention. And so it wasn't, it just didn't strike me as that different a composition to be, one of few women in CS 107. And I do think that that's, I tried computer science, I liked it, and I kept going. What more is there to say? I don't know.
It's a great story. It's a great story. After our panel today, we're going to have another panel on Startup America. I want to take a second just to talk to you about that before I ask the next question. So Startup America is a new initiative that's recently been launched by the president. It's being headed up by Steve Case, the founder of AOL. And the goal is really to see what we can do to help jumpstart young entrepreneurs who want to get going, which is why it's called Startup America, because our thought is if we invest and if we get the private sector to partner with us to invest, provide this important access to capital, then hopefully we can grow spawn, thank you very much, spawn the Facebooks of tomorrow. And so access to capital obviously is very, very important. I wanted to mention that we also have I'll get back to that in a minute. Hold on. Before I do that, I want to ask you the question because obviously, Teresa, this is an area that you focus on. Tell us what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, and what we could all do collectively to open up this access to capital for women.
So, this is obviously something that I care a lot about personally and I've thought about for a long time, so it's a great question. I think that there were some stats, and there are many stats that are not so heartening from the past, but recently, in the last 2 to 3 years, I've personally observed a great increase in the number of women entrepreneurs coming to seek venture capital and raising it successfully. And this is really different in the last 2 to 3 years than it was in 1999, 2000, which was when I switched from being on the entrepreneurial side, trying to raise capital, to being on the venture side and investing in companies. And I've seen 2 big trends behind that. One is what I like to call the rise of the entrepreneurial generation, which is people in their 20s, both men and women, in equal parts, see that going out and starting a company is the great thing that they can do right away. It's like the pinnacle of their career. It's what they aspire to do, not to work for other companies. And the second thing is driven by the understanding that women in the social web-driven economy play a critical part in your customer base and are often far more influential than any other constituency within your customer base. On the entrepreneurial generation stuff, both anecdotally and through numbers. So anecdotally, 5 of the last 6 companies that I've personally invested in through Accel have had entrepreneurs all in their 20s. And interestingly, they've been equal, in fact, slightly more female co-founders than male co-founders in that last group. But statistically, what I thought was super interesting was two things. One is, that they want to do this, that this is sort of a really exciting thing that they can do, and I'm sure partially inspired by people like Mark Zuckerberg here at Facebook. But in a Pew study of teenagers about leaving high school, what do you want to do when you get out of college? What do you aspire to be? 70% of them said, I want to be my own boss. I want to start my own company. I want to be like Jessica Heron. I want to start my own company. And then an MIT study by Professor Roberts showed that the age of first entrepreneurs leaving MIT used to be in their 40s. It used to be actually early 40s for men, mid to late 40s for women. And as recently as the last 5 years, it's dropped down into the 20s for both men and women. But I think the really exciting thing for women is there used to be a gap in the percentage of graduates who wanted to start companies, many more men than women, and that too has closed. It's basically the same. And then just briefly on the impact of women in this new social web economy. So obviously there are both companies that are targeted towards the female consumer, companies like Jessica's and ModCloth and others, where 70-80% of household spend is controlled by women. But there are also most companies that just represent the demographic population of first the US and then the world, like Facebook, where the women are actually far more influential than the men in terms of driving activity and influence. So this was true in 2006 when Axel invested in Facebook, and then Cheryl and her team gave me the data from more recently, and it's still true. 71% of the daily active fans and users on Facebook are women. 62% of all the sharing activity is driven by women. So I think with these stats as being sort of undeniable facts, women have not only an important, but I think a critical and valuable role to play at the founding and executive table of all these tech startups.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Jessica, let's hear your story, because similar to Mark, you began in college. What got you going? What made you decide that while you were at Stanford that you actually had time to start your own company as well? What's your story?
Well, it was a great time, down the street here in '94. It's amazing to think about today that when I was in college, people didn't use email. The internet was something that businesses and consumers were just discovering. So opportunity was everywhere. I actually think at all times, if you're looking properly, opportunity is always everywhere. But when something that fundamental is shifting, every business, every channel, it's like you thought the world was flat and turns out it's round. So there's going to be all kinds of disruptive innovations, and it was such a climate for invention. And I too was raised by an engineering father, always new ideas and new ways of thinking, and had that in my blood, and really was excited to go out and do something different. And at that time, I would say you're right that things have changed. There was very few females walking around talking to venture capitalists and starting businesses, and there's a lot more of that today. But even then, I never felt conscious or aware of my gender. It didn't seem to be an issue. If anything, it was an advantage to stand out and be memorable.
But go a little bit further, because I went to Stanford just a few years before you did, 20 to be specific. How did you make time for it? How did you focus on your studies and also focus on your business?
Well, that was a questionable focus on my studies. And I was in business school at the time, actually, and I dropped out after my first year to get funding from Kleiner Perkins and start and co-found what would become Wedding Channel. And I just, at that time, had the conviction, as my father said to me, getting into Stanford Business School, that's good, but dropping out, that's a proud moment. Yeah, so I didn't quite do both at the same time.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us all. Now, I have a question for the whole panel, because as I mentioned, getting young folks excited about this at an early age is something that's really a priority for the Obama administration, and the President mentioned it in his remarks. But could you share with us what more you think we could do to get more women to go in, more girls excited to go into these fields and continue in their studies as opposed to abandoning them at such a startlingly young age? What more could we do? Let's just go around. Whoever would like to jump in.
I think there's a lot of positive progress. I know there's organizations that Michelle Obama supports and the Stella Dot Foundation supports as well, Girls Inc. And that focuses on the mission of helping young girls be bold and smart and confident. And it's still an issue. Girls don't think they're good at math, and for no good reason. They still are challenged to go into math and science and have the confidence. And we're still raising girls to be polite and boys to be aggressive. And I think coming out with that message, just like with math and science, that being smart is cool and feminine and pursuing math and science, and that doing the things that it takes to be a successful entrepreneur, which is about being tenacious and aggressive, is something that women should and can do. And we have to celebrate that and support organizations and get involved and spread that message.
That's great. Cheryl?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I also think what the White House, what President Obama is doing on strengthening math and science education overall is really important. You know, we obviously need a broader funnel. Starting off with a stronger math and science curriculum everywhere is really important. I know that's been focal for you in the White House. There's also really focusing on, you know, the problems with stereotyping. So there's been a bunch of recent work that shows that if right before you take a math test, girls are asked to check their gender, just check the box, are you male or female? They do worse on the test than a control group which doesn't mention gender. That means that gender is reinforcing I'm not good at math and science. Someone told me the other day that the first Barbie, the first talking Barbie, the first sentence she said was, I don't like math.
Oh. Math is hard, let's go shopping.
Is that what it was?
You remember that pretty clearly. Huh?
That's worse.
Yeah.
That's worse than I don't like math. But the question is, you know, can we tell our daughters from the beginning, you're good at this. Mm-hmm. You are good at this, because there are studies in schools where girls are bolstered as much as boys and they're told they're good, and they do very, very well. And so how do we, you know, on purpose, very methodically build up the confidence our girls have that they're good at this?
And reinforce it. Did you want to?
Well, I think it's not even, it's also setting the expectation. I'm raising 2 daughters, and my husband and I talk about, you know, we don't expect our daughters to be Euclid, but at the same time, we have high expectations on you absolutely can do this if you work hard. So it's not about whether or not you have a natural aptitude for math or sciences, is that this is what it takes to be knowledgeable and a productive citizen and continue, and that you must master this. And it's not okay to think that math isn't as important as reading and you have to pursue it.
Absolutely. Jonathan?
I'm also raising 2 daughters. They're 3 and 6, so they're too young to think that they're not good at math yet. My 6-year-old's working on, you know, on addition. The 3-year-old's working on counting. They're both doing great. But what they are not too young for is already to have the notion that they want to behave like girls, and that some things are for girls and some things are for boys. And I was amazed. I was shocked and bewildered to discover how young this starts, that my 2-year-old would start clamoring for pink clothes. There's no DNA for the color pink. That happens because they look around and they see all the other girls wearing pink. And so I do think that it's what starts very, very early, and I think what is an extremely powerful force with young girls is a desire to identify with being female and to do the things that are coded female, and even more so to avoid things that are coded male. And there are so few things that manage to kind of slide through in that unisex category, that very narrow, you know, yellow and green band. And I really think that when, you know, when I look at technology, it's omnipresent in the household. At least in our, you know, in our communities, we have iPads and iPhones everywhere. Our kids, girls and boys, are using technology at an ever younger age. I don't think, you know, for many of us, we are fortunate enough that our daughters don't have a problem with access. But even our daughters are exposed, I think, continually to these stereotypes, and I don't think that that's getting a lot better. If I look at just the TV that my kids watch, and the programming for girls and for boys, which is so separate, and, you know, even today, sort of even the sciencey and mathy ones, it's, you know, 4 boys and the token girl character, and we can do so much better than this. We can do so much better than this, and I do think actually that media has enormous power to shape what girls think is possible for themselves.
And that's why today allows us to go around the conventional media and talk directly, which is why another reason we're so grateful to be here. Therese?
So I want to first give a shout out to the importance of role models, and then I'm going to end with a story just re-emphasizing confidence, and a rather unfortunate story with my 8-year-old daughter. But on the role models, which, you know, I think you heard both from Jocelyn and from Jessica, how important that was for them to be excited and want to feel like, you know, they can be in technology, they can do whatever they want. I'm in the business side now, but I actually am an engineering major from undergrad, and when we were the side of women engineers, we're trying to look at why was the dropout rate 2x for women versus the men in our cohort. And interestingly, not surprising to me, but interestingly, we looked at it and we said, well, how did their grades fare for the women who dropped out versus the men who dropped out? Turns out the women who dropped out actually had higher grades than the men who dropped out of engineering. So it wasn't that. It was actually very much this issue of role models and not understanding what it was they were going to be able to do, the cool things that they could create when you're stuck there in your core class learning about inorganic chemistry and electromagnetic field theory. Like, why am I doing this? And so all of the women who dropped out had not a single close role model in their family or in their friends who was an engineer or a scientist. So they didn't understand, the wonderful, amazing things, hey, I could be Jocelyn. I could be managing and creating the algorithms for what the Facebook newsfeed is. That's cool. I think my daughter would love that. And all of the men who stayed with it all had a very close family friend or relative who was in the field. And that was the #1 single cause for why people stayed versus why they left, and the gender difference. So with that as the backdrop, so my daughter, who's 8, so unfortunately I have no idea where this came from. She was playing this math computer game where you compete with other unknown students to do math problems and see who wins. And she said to me, she said, "Mommy, I don't like to compete against the boys because boys are better at math than girls." I was like physically taken aback. I was like, where did that come from? That did not come from me, or my, where whenever anything breaks or I'm the one who fixes the stuff in my house, and Jess knows because she knows my husband, and it's kind of the same with her and Chad. Anyway, so I'm like, where is this coming from? She's not seeing this stereotype in our house. So, but it's all about the building the confidence. I said, you know what? How about this? Why don't you just practice more on your own before you compete? See how good you can, get the highest scores you can. Then go out there and pick, doesn't matter if it's a boy or girl name, go pick somebody else got a slightly higher score than you and play against them, because that's how you get better at everything, right? That's how you get better at soccer. That's how you get better at math. And sure enough, she did that, and happy ending, which is now she doesn't even look at what the names are, and she just tries to shoot for people who have 5 or 10 points higher than her score, and she's so excited that she can beat boys too.
Well, that's a good story, and it's actually a good segue into, we're going to go back to the questions that are being posted on Facebook, and this is one from Kelly in Madison, Wisconsin. Kelly, I hope you're watching because we're reading your question, and it's for you, Jocelyn, because we're talking about women as role models for other women. And the question that she has for you is, as a fellow engineer, she says, I'm sometimes discouraged by the lack of female peers and mentors. How have you coped with this over your career?
I guess I've been fortunate that I have had great peers and mentors of both genders throughout my career. I'd say actually probably my best mentor ever was a man. He was close in age, and he was my, second or third boss but it was when I was still a couple of years out of school, and we had a fantastic relationship where we could give each other untrammeled feedback, and I think we both grew a lot as people because of that. So I don't think it's necessarily about that your peers and mentors have to be women so much as that there are people who believe in you and who inspire you with the self-confidence to know that you can do more. That said, I've also been fortunate to work for a lot of companies that have amazing women leaders. The first company I worked for out of school, PCOrder.com, was helmed by a female president, Christy Jones. And I worked for many years at a company, VMware, that had a female CEO. And now, of course, at Facebook, we have Cheryl in the C-suite. So I think, they're there. It doesn't take a lot. And, I think the key is to just build great relationships, great connections with people who believe in you, no matter what their gender is.
One more, and then we're going to go to the audience here, or also some live questions that are coming in too. This one's from Jessica in San Francisco, and she says that there have been angel groups popping up lately that focus on supporting companies led by women. So Teresa, do you think that this is a good way to help female entrepreneurs, and does it actually work?
I think it is a good way. I think there are many other things that we've already talked about in the panel, so it's the aggregation of the network effect of all of those things. So there are some really great groups about that. Things like Golden Seeds, which has 180 women who are current and former executives and entrepreneurs who are funding with their own money $22 million for 36 different startups, which is terrific. But I think really what that speaks to is the idea that if you can get more women to want to start companies, then these women become successful. They invest in other companies in their space, both male and female started companies. But that increases the access to capital and increases the connections to venture, and where you can get even larger capital. because really it's no different than when you think about you're hiring people. You all hire people all the time. If someone refers somebody to you that you trust that person, if Jessica refers somebody to me, that's going to have more impact on the likelihood that you're going to meet with that person and hire that person. It's the same when you're trying to raise capital. So creating these networks of women, whether it's specifically around funding or other networks, Cheryl's done a fabulous job with creating Women of Silicon Valley out here, which is really kind of bringing together both peers and people who are kind of the up and coming rising stars to sort of have role models and see that you can really be successful. I think those are the things that really kind of drive things. And then there's pure old-fashioned networking. Like, I've known Jessica for a long time, and I introduced Jessica to Cheryl last year, and now we're all on a panel together.
Absolutely. All right, let's get the audience involved here. Questions from the audience? We have a microphone. We'll bring it to you. Oh, come on, you guys. You have to get involved in this as well. Okay. Oh, here you go. Yes.
Hi.
Thank you. Introduce yourself to us, please.
Hi, I'm Gloria Lau. I just joined 2 weeks ago as a technical program manager here. I wanted some advice from all of you about how to propel our careers into the executive level. I was a senior director at NVIDIA before I came here of engineering, and breaking that VP barrier was just so hard. And I just want some advice from all of you.
Great. Jocelyn, you want to start?
I really don't know what to tell you. I was promoted to vice president while I was gone on maternity leave at VMware. So actually, I also got a promotion when I was gone on maternity leave with my first child. So my husband and I joked that if I just kept having babies, I would eventually be chairman of the board, and so it goes. I think I don't want to steal Cheryl's thunder because she actually has wonderful and specific advice on this topic that I think is really pertinent. And one of the biggest is just to lean forward, to put your hand up, to take on more, and to do more, and to stand out. And that's easy to say and hard to do.
So I think that that's exactly the right advice, right? Which is just go for it. Don't think about just do what you love and follow it, and you'll be great at it, and people will notice and recognize you. So this is a thing that I think Jessica talked about. Sometimes it's an advantage to be the lone female or one of the few females in a specific area. So I think that can be something that's really an advantage. But I think absolutely it's about you've got to find the right place, the right company, the right culture that values what you offer, but also the way you want to work. And if you've been terrific and great, I have many stories of women like Jocelyn who've been promoted on maternity leave or on other types of leaves. And that's kind of seen as, frankly, it's good business because that boss was actually trying to make sure that Jocelyn was going to come back.
That was smart.
And it worked.
I'm going to jump in, even though I'm obviously not in technology, since my hand is shaking here, hoping that this works as it has been so far. I would like to brag. But I'll tell you, the first time I received a promotion, I had been working really, really hard, and I'd been doing more work than was my assignment. I was always going beyond the call of duty. And I had a woman who was my mentor. And she said, you should go in and ask for a promotion. And my initial reaction was, well, my boss should see how hard I'm working, right? So he should just give me a promotion. And I was a little grumpy that he didn't seem to recognize that I was worthy. And I thought it would be totally inappropriate to go in and promote myself. And she said, go and ask. The worst thing that he's going to do is tell you no. So I went into my boss and I gave him this long explanation for why I thought I deserved a promotion. And he was kind of half listening to me. And at the end, he said, well, okay. And, I was shocked. But the point is, even if he hadn't said okay, what was wrong with the exercise? And I think women hold back. I think women sit around waiting to be recognized, waiting to be promoted, and you can't, because men don't shy away. If they think that they're deserving, and even if they don't think they're deserving, they're not shy about asking. And if you are following your passion, you're doing what excites you, you're doing a great job, just because your boss doesn't think to recognize you, recognize yourself. Sure.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I think really the challenge for women is about owning success and really believing it. So the data is really clear on this. If men do something well and you ask them why, they attribute it to themselves, their own skills, which is, no, it's good. I mean, it's also, hey, I'm awesome. Why would you ask such a silly question? But if women do something well and you ask them about their success, they attribute it to either working hard or external factors. I got lucky, my friend helped me, I worked really hard. And that's both fine, and both of those are appropriate. The problem is, often in order to contribute more, you have to believe you're going to contribute more. And if as a man you believe you can contribute more, and as a woman you think you need to get lucky, you're less likely to raise your hand. And so I think one of the main things women need to do is really try, even if you don't quite feel it, to fake it, to like own your success and believe that when the next problem is there to be solved, you can solve it. And that's, I think, something that we have to work on for ourselves and our female colleagues and for our daughters.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. Getting ahead isn't a gender issue, but it may be traits that leaders need to be promoted in order to lead and manage and motivate a team and make decisions on a larger scale. And if women don't have that as naturally, because again, boys are raised to be more aggressive, they take credit for their work, women are more reticent to do that, then it's just a personal change that you need to take on within yourself and say, I am going to cultivate these characteristics within me that put me in a place of leadership, and just be that. And it does go to what we continue to have to give that message to girls. I don't say to my daughters, don't speak unless spoken to. I tell them, if you want something, go get it.
Exactly. That's exactly the message. Do we have any that are coming over live? Let's hear what you guys out in our Facebook audience are thinking.
We do. It's a question from Carol Bonds from Kentucky, and I think it's very well suited because everyone on this panel has talked a lot about how at the home we're actually fostering, it sounds like most of you have daughters, how you're fostering and encouraging that growth as young women. But how do educators and how do these, institutions actually help women pursue mathematics and other technical fields from a scholastic standpoint?
Good question. Very good. Ideas, Jocelyn?
I'll tell you what, I do think that seeing women at the front of the classroom in college teaching these classes makes a big difference. And it is as small as the number of women undergraduates majoring in computer science is, 18%. The numbers in graduate school and the numbers in faculty are vanishingly small. They are single-digit percentages. And MIT has made a big effort to recruit more women into the STEM fields, has turned the tide, has brought, I think, into the sort of 30-40% territory in the last 12 years with a really concerted recruiting effort. And I think that makes an immense difference in attracting women into those classrooms. So that's an important place to start.
Thank you.
So I would agree. My best friend from undergrad is actually a professor at MIT, and I think that women who are the rare few in that world take it upon themselves and do wonderful things to try to encourage interest in STEM even with younger girls. So she and several other female colleagues open up their labs at MIT once a quarter to girls from middle school at various from South Boston, less equipped schools, shall we say, and bring them in just to teach them that science is fun and science is cool and you can actually do really exciting things. And this is why math and science matters. And it's really amazing to see the difference in these girls' eyes about, why this is exciting and something that I want to do, because I would love to do that someday. That's cool.
That's great. That's great. Cheryl?
I think one thing to add is access to computers is really important. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and if you had told me this a couple of years ago, I never would have believed it, but I let her play video games, like Angry Birds. And I do it because every woman I know who actually went into computer science played video games. I think there are a lot of fears parents have about technology. Parents worry about their kids on all kinds of things, and I think they worry more about their daughters. And so therefore they're more protective of their daughters, what their daughters do online, and I actually think that's going to hurt the girls. Not that we shouldn't be protective. I'm a parent. I'm protective. But just access to technology. Kids, every person I know who's a great computer scientist was on a computer for a lot of their day. Mark Zuckerberg will tell you his parents bought him a computer and he sat there. Jocelyn will say, I had a computer. I spent time on it. And so we have to let our kids on computers if we want them to be technical. And we have to let our daughters be there too. And we have to be equally protective of our boys and our girls in order to get to equal numbers in computer science in the classroom.
Great. Thanks. Jess?
I think one of the things from a university perspective in our education system is really integrating industry and having people come back. You talked a lot about people can get excited about something not when it's so esoteric and theoretical, but when you can see a practical application that seems like a very cool contribution to make to the world, or something that you really want to do. And so, I mean, I remember my studies in economics at Stanford, incredibly theoretical. You know, at Stellendot, we're doing a student entrepreneur program and trying to give people real skills, which have a lot more to do with sales than it does science, but because that's really something you need in life, because you've got to also sell yourself regardless of a functional discipline that you go into later on in life. But I do think that all that we can do, right, as people that are already working to give back to the university that you went to spend time with students, to make a curriculum real and interesting and exciting and engaging. I mean, I see that at the elementary level, and try to spend as much time as I can back on campus, because I think that makes a real difference. I think school has to come to life, and when it does, that is something that matters to students and will influence the choices they make.
To this point, a couple of weeks ago, I was at the University of Pennsylvania speaking at a colloquium of international university presidents that came in really from all over the world. And we talked about STEM. My whole speech was about STEM education and what we could do. And a couple of the presidents mentioned the fact that they're looking at the initial core curriculum and ways of making those first level courses more interesting, and in the thought that they can capture girls early on. And that their theory is that if it's not interesting in that initial introduction, that girls will say, well, that's not fun, and they'll go do something else. Whereas boys, if it's not interesting, that's okay with them. They'll just keep doing it if it's what they think that they want to do for a career. And they're also looking at broadening the kinds of dual degrees that are offered, so that you don't just simply have to focus only on engineering. You could couple that with art sciences or whatever, and that tends to bring more girls into it as well. So I raise it just to say that a lot of our university presidents are focused on this issue as well. And if we have suggestions, we should go back to the schools that we graduated from, where we have a relationship, and encourage them and get involved in those schools. And I would go back again to change the equation, where we have over 100 companies that are working with Ursula Burns at Xerox that are focusing on these communities. All of you could select a school or a community too. And if you go into the school and you talk to them about Facebook or any of your other companies that are represented here today, it does bring it to life, and it makes a difference. One passing interaction with somebody with whom you can identify can change a person's career. Let's go back to our room that's here. Any questions from our audience here?
We do. We actually have one more right
Okay,
before
great.
the Startup America panels come. If you want to come over
Oh,
here.
are you beginning to segue us
this is
to a
yeah,
close?
this is my very,
Okay.
very smooth segue. That this
That
is
was very
probably the
good.
last question, but I'm going to just pass over the mic.
Hi, I've noticed, and it's one of the hallmarks of Silicon Valley is comfort level with making mistakes and failing, or not even failing, but maybe recognizing that you might have done things differently. Do you think that there's a difference in perception of women when they maybe make mistakes and have to shift gears than there is of men? And do you think men sometimes are given more of a benefit of the doubt anywhere along the way, and how that might be changed?
It's an excellent question. Let's everybody take a turn on that one. Jessica?
It goes back to that certain traits in men are viewed as more desirable. And let's face it, we still live in a society where it's far more acceptable for a woman to take time off, and she can be a success being a wife and a mother. But a man has to have a career, right? He is put up from the beginning to be aggressive, to take risks, to go out there and do things. This is a long choice and path that they're going to follow. And I still think that, you know, for women, they are more hesitant to do things that may be perceived as mistakes. They're more bashful. There is just more of a hesitancy there, and that's what women have to overcome, because they have to view the only form of failure is simply not trying, right? Trying is success. You just keep doing it long enough, and eventually something works out. That's what all entrepreneurship looks like, right? There's no, you just start from scratch and presto, it's magic. And men are just sort of view it as the long haul, and women can stop out a little bit easier. So I think that that's something that contributes to that.
I think our companies, our institutions can do a really important job here. That, you know, company culture, I think, falls very carefully along these lines. And I think what's great about Silicon Valley, and I think is something we work really hard at Facebook, is making it okay to fail. We have all these posters on our walls which reinforce this. They say, you know, done is better than perfect, or move fast and break things, or what would you do if you weren't afraid? And so I think if you take men or women and put them in the right environment, you can make it safe to fail. The best thing I ever saw in this is a woman named Kim Scott. I worked with her at Google. She had a team of about 100 people, and she had this big monkey she called Oops the Monkey. And every week, she had a team-wide meeting, 100 people, and people would stand up and say the biggest mistake they made that week, and whoever had the best one got Whoops the Monkey on their desk for the week. And so she took something where, rather than hiding your mistakes, she set up a culture where people were stepping up and, not just sharing their mistakes, but really applauding each other for being, big enough to try. And that's something, Facebook worked really hard at. I think companies that are successful need to work really hard because you don't want employees or coworkers who are leaning back. You want people who are leaning in.
Absolutely. Jocelyn, or shall we say the one?
I'm a big fan of this comic strip called XKCD, which you can find at xkcd.org, and it's a geeky comic strip. There's this one panel that has really stuck with me. There's these two stick figures that are male, and one of them is doing a math equation on the board, and he's made a mistake. And the thought balloon over the other guy is, what an obvious mistake. This guy is bad at math. Then you have the exact same panel, but the one with the math problem and the mistake is female. And the thought balloon says, what a dumb mistake. Women are bad at math. And I think this goes sort of straight to the point of your question, which is, yes, I do think that we suffer from stereotypes and we suffer from bias in which if a woman makes a mistake, it's taken as evidence that women are no good at blah, as opposed to it just being, hey, her mistake. And so I do think that when we're in a field where we're a small minority, we do, I think, tend to feel self-conscious that we are representing not just ourselves, but in some ways all of womankind. And I think there is a really enormous difference between being the only woman in the room and being one of 2 or 3 or 4 women in the room. I think even something as small as that just can make a big swing in who you're representing and who you can be, and how you're perceived. And so I think that we have a little bootstrap problem here, right? Which is we're at this tiny number of CS majors, 18%, and if we could just increase that a little bit more, back to 36%, back to 40%, we don't have to get to 50-50, we don't have to get to 60%, which is the representative percentage of all female college students. If we could just get the numbers up above being that kind of only 1 or 2 in the room, I think that we could maybe break that cycle a lot better.
Just following up on that in terms of the difference that you see when there's more than one woman in the room. I'm on a bunch of private company boards, and there's also studies that actually back up Jocelyn's stuff. So there have been several studies on public company boards, I know Cheryl's on several of them as well, where if there's only one female board member, the contribution by that board member and the perceived contribution of the other non-female board members of the female is much less. And it's because I think the woman feels like, well, whatever I say, I'm like representing my entire gender. And so she's less likely to speak up and say things, which is incredibly unfortunate. But as soon as you get 2 or 3 on the board, you see a massive difference. And it is getting a lot better, but the way I see it is the best way to get that to be better is to have more women founders and more women executives like the people on this room, because I wish I could say that it was getting dramatically better in the finance investing side. We're getting a little bit better, but our rate of progress is slightly worse than in computer science and engineering, because I was just in a board meeting the other day. There were 16 people in that room. 16. I was the only female in that room. Fortunately, I have been trained by my male partners to not be so quiet, so I had no problem with contributing, but it took me many years to get to that point. Really did.
And I would say to you, I've been in the private sector, I've been in the public sector, I've been on corporate boards, I've been the only woman in the room. I think it is really, it's your life. Choose carefully where you spend it. Pick companies that share your values and your priorities and accept your lifestyle and what makes you whole, and make sure that you are whole, and be resilient. And the best way to be resilient is have a sense of humor. I mean, you've got to be able to laugh at yourself. When me shaking with this iPod, it makes it a little easier if you're willing to make fun of yourself. And if you fail, just get back up and try again. And that's really the race is not to the swiftest. You've got to just keep at it. but pick where you go and self-select because you've got a lot of great choices. And I thank you all for coming today. Those of you who are on Facebook, online, thank you for sharing some time with us. We hope that you found this to be helpful. I want to thank the entire panel and, of course, Cheryl, for making your home our home and allowing us to spend this really very important time with you on a topic that we all cared so much about. Thanks a lot. Make it possible for more women to stay in their jobs. The reason why I started with this question, we had a forum in the White House about a year ago on workplace flexibility generally and how really it actually leads to greater productivity. But I'm curious about what you guys think specifically within the technology arena. So let's start with you, Cheryl, since you're our host.
So I think the issue is flexibility for parents and both people, both men and women. The number one thing that will help more women stay in the workforce is actually a greater gender balance at home. Mm-hmm. So in a lot of ways, we've made more progress in our workplace than we have in our home. In the home, if a heterosexual couple both work full-time, the woman will do 2 times the amount of housework and 3 times the amount of childcare that the husband does. And so, basically, he has 1 job and she has 2 or 3. And so I think the answer for all of our companies is to make flex time available for people of both genders, so that people of both genders have the opportunity to contribute fully in the home and at work.
What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, it's critical. There's so many talented women that are sidelined because they actually choose to want to spend more time raising kids when they get into their 30s, and they look at rigid options of either.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Valerie Jarrett, and I'm a senior advisor to President Barack Obama. And we are so delighted this afternoon to be here at Facebook. And we thank everyone at Facebook for hosting us. The President just concluded a town hall, and it was terrific. And now we're looking forward to having a panel discussion on women in technology. I want to specifically thank Cheryl for not only being here and hosting us today, but she actually flew out to Washington yesterday to be a part of a discussion that the President had about comprehensive immigration reform. And so on the flight back out here, we had a chance to spend some time, and I know what a dynamic leader she is. So thank you on behalf of everyone who's here today for hosting us and creating this wonderful opportunity.
Well, thank you for coming. We're very excited.
Well, good. Well, good. We're also joined by Jocelyn Goldfein from Facebook. And on the way out, Cheryl told me how unusual it is to have a director of engineering be a woman. And so congratulations to you. And we're all looking forward to insight from you.
Thanks.
We are also joined by Teresa Gao-Rosetta, who's an entrepreneur and venture capitalist at Excel Partners, where she focuses on internet and software investment. And since we know how important access to capital is, we're delighted to have you with us. So thank you, Teresa, for coming. She gets a little round of applause.
You're backing Facebook, if nothing else.
I know, exactly. Smart investment, I would say. Jessica Heron, who we are told is a serial entrepreneur and the CEO and founder of Stella and Dot, as well as WeddingChannel.com, which I understand you started in school. So congratulations, and we're delighted to have you with us. So welcome as well.
Thank you.
So we are looking forward to having an interesting conversation about how we can get more women into technology. And I'm just going to start out by saying this is a priority of President Obama. You heard, those of you who participated or attended the town hall, you heard him over and over again emphasize how important it is to get girls and women interested in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and math. That's the wave of the future. That's where the innovation is. That's where the terrific paying jobs are. And that's a big challenge for the administration. And as I was doing a little research for today, a couple of few facts I thought were pretty telling, shall we say. So first of all, our workforce is now comprised 50% of women. In technology, it's 25%. Now, if you think about it, also, the number of companies that are starting off and getting going that are owned by women, in technology, it's 8%, and the amount of capital that's being invested, a percentage in women-owned businesses in technology is only 5%. So if you look at it from that perspective, you see we really, really have a long way to go. So we're doing a variety of things in the administration. What we're hoping to do in the course of this panel is to engage in a conversation. We're going to be I'm going to do some questions that have been posted on Facebook. We're going to have questions from those of you who are sitting here in the audience. And for those of you who are listening, we are so delighted to have people who are on Facebook and who are going to participate. We'll also have some live questions coming from you. So we're going to manage to do all of that in the course of our time together, and I'm going to keep things going pretty quickly. So let me focus for a second still on what the administration is doing. We have an initiative that is being led by Ursula Burns, who's the CEO of Xerox, who's a wonderful role model, I think, for women and girls. And she's focusing on a project called Change the Equation. And it's a not-for-profit entity that's raising money to focus on over 100 communities where they're going to go into our high schools and try to get girls interested in these fields, because what we're finding, and Cheryl and I also talked about this on the plane, research is showing that at a very early age, as early as 8th grade, girls go on a different path. And so what we want to be able to do is excite them and get them to think it's cool again, as the president said in the town hall. There's money in the president's budget to set up centers around the country, women business centers, to help women entrepreneurs get going, provide them to access to capital. We have a wonderful small business administration that's working on staffing these centers and providing, again, much needed early capital to help women-owned businesses get going. And then we're just investing in STEM education. The president at the town hall mentioned how important it is at a time when we're trying to be fiscally responsible to still continue to invest in education and innovation, because that's the wave of the future. So I'm going to pause with what we're doing and get started a little bit on the questions for all of you that we have here. And I'm hoping that this is my first time, which shows you how technology has been known to escape me, but I've been told that if I just press these buttons, I'm going to be able to do this. And it worked. It worked. So I'm just so happy it worked. I cannot tell you how happy it worked. So my first question is from Amy in Knoxville. And it's a question for all of the panelists, and so I'm going to give you all a chance to jump in. And that is, do you think that making the workplace more flexible for women, like flex time opportunity, can help